Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Brain Fitness Webinar Part 2. We are so glad you could join us today. My name is Minoo, and I'm one of the organizers of today's event with the Brain Fitness program at San Diego College of Continuing Education. This webinar brings together community members, professionals, and students to explore brain health, a key part of healthy aging. Whether you are here to learn for yourself, support a loved one, or help others, you are in the right place. As I said, this meeting will be recorded. Please make sure to stay muted, and for your privacy, you could turn off your camera or change your displayed name. We are pleased to have an excellent guest speaker with us today, Jim Houliston. Please join me in welcoming Jim Houliston, one of the most ambidextrous people on earth. Jim is an accomplished artist, athlete, educator, and bilingual tour guide whose innovative work bridges creativity, movement, and science. He inspired the creation of the world's first mirror computer keyboard and has earned recognition in the brain body science community for his pioneering research in bilateral coordination. His presentations and collaborations include the San Diego Public Library, McGill University, Dawson College, and the Brain Observatory. Jim is also the author of Histories, Ambidextrous, and Benefits of Mirror Movement Development. Jim, thank you so much for accepting our invitation. Please, we are so excited to listen to you.
Great. Minoo, thank you. It is my pleasure to be here. Was very excited when I heard about this course and so glad that we made this connection because just so much of the brain, obviously very, very interesting to all of us. 3 pound little squishy thing that's in our head that just controls and does everything that we need for our bodies. So obviously very important that we keep it as best working as possible for as long as possible. Alzheimer's, unfortunately, can be a real robber of that. So hopefully, what I'll be sharing today is something that folks can ultimately take to heart, put into practice, and experience benefits themselves for ultimately assisting in curbing this disease. So thank you again for
Thank you.
having me. So
Thank you, of course.
well, we'll get into it here. My first slide. So mirror movement development, this is something that I've been practicing for about 17 years now. And it's something that ultimately had started with skateboarding rehabilitation. I'm going to get into just all the ins and outs of mirror movement development here as we continue onward. But I want to do just a quick little overview of what we're going to be going through. Now, if you look at the slide at the very top, at the very bottom, kind of looks all normal. But in the very middle there, you'll notice on the right side, it looks very familiar. On the left, it's the same exact thing, simply written in mirrored direction. And that's a big part of mirror movement development. I'll be explaining that as we get into this, but just this overview slide here. Over the course of this presentation, I'll give a personal intro, just everything on myself, how I got into all of this, my credentials here for today, just what exactly mirror movement development is, some famous practitioners from history and today of mirror movement development. We'll get as well into the science of mirror movement development, the benefits of mirror movement development, and in particular for this presentation, mirror movement development and relationship with Alzheimer's. And a lot of that has to do with memory, learning, and exercise. There's also a bit of a connection with EMDR. EMDR is something that I've heard of within recent years after I've had friends who have heard of it and have said, oh my gosh, Jim, you with everything in MMD, you would love EMDR. So I'm going to explain just what that is and its connections with MMD, and then ultimately some research and resources, and then closing everything all together. So again, my name is Jim Houliston. I am an artist, I'm an athlete, I'm an educator, I'm an author, which I'm sure is totally clear when you look at this slide right here. You see a lot of it written in mirror direction. The upper left-hand corner there, you can see that is my book, Big 3 MMD, which is actually the world's first symmetric book because it's written both forwards and backwards in mirrored and traditional direction. So you can actually practice reading in mirror direction from right to left, which in a nutshell, the layman's science of it, it actually physically sends blood flow to your opposite brain hemisphere, which creates new neurons, new synapses that thickens the brain's corpus callosum over time. And to be completely transparent here when it comes to my credentials on what it is that I do, I kind of went in through the side gates on this whole thing as a profession because, frankly, I did not go to school for brain or body science. I've been practicing this, though, for so long and have experienced such incredible results, of which I'll share here today. And I just felt so compelled to share this story, not only mine, but my desire to hear other stories of other people who are basically ambidextrous brought me down this rabbit hole of researching famous people from history who have practiced this, their benefits. And so my book, I basically synthesize all of that together, present that in this way, and have been doing presentations that are really similar to this over the last number of years. And if you're like me, this is something that you never really heard about growing up, although there is some MMD that average people do practice. I'll get into a bit of that. But one of the most famous of these practitioners you can see here on the book cover is Leonardo da Vinci. He's one of the three people I write the most about, along with Benjamin Franklin. And when it comes to what for many years, frankly, has felt like my confidence with explaining this because I lack those degrees on paper in neuroscience kinesiology. I found so much comfort when coming across a certain quote by my main man right here, Mr. Leonardo da Vinci, who wrote all of his notebooks throughout his whole life in mirror direction. He was a native lefty, and so to write left-handed, it's mechanically advantageous to do it in mirror direction. I don't know how many of you folks in attendance here are lefties yourself. I grew up natively as a righty. I do everything, though, now lefty in this mirrored motion, in particular, mirror reading, mirror writing, and it's a completely learnable thing. Da Vinci, he never really wrote in his notebooks exactly why he wrote like this. He did write about a need for physical rehabilitation after he had dislocated one of his hands. So it's possible that he had dabbled with ambidexterity as a result of that. There was also a contemporary of Da Vinci's who wrote a book about handwriting who said, yeah, if you're a native lefty, you'll find it advantageous to write in mirror direction because you're not smearing the ink. You can see what you're writing. You basically bypass a lot of the gripes that lefties will talk about when writing English, which is written from left to right. But I love this quote of Da Vinci's. It's given me so much more confidence because I think of Da Vinci as basically one of history's greatest geniuses. Here's Da Vinci, here's a quote, and I'll read it for you all in this mirror direction here, but he's basically answering academics who think of Da Vinci as, what are you doing writing about all this stuff, whether it's botany, whether it's brain stuff, whether it's flight and aviation, hydrodynamics, so many things that Da Vinci is known for, because Da Vinci, he never went to school. Da Vinci, he was one of 17 kids. He was actually born a bastard kid. He wasn't permitted to go to school, which was perfect because if he did, we never would have heard of Da Vinci because he would have gone to a normal school, become a notary just like his dad, and all of his teachers would have said, oh my gosh, you're writing with first the wrong hand, quote unquote, in mirror direction. You're a dyslexic kid. We better fix that. Thankfully, Da Vinci never had that. He was free to practice this, and it would have made his brain abnormally symmetric and highly efficient. So this quote that he says right here, I'll read it, of course, from right to left. He says, they will say that I, having no literary skill, cannot properly express that which I desire to treat of, but they do not know that my subjects are to be dealt with by experience rather than by words. And experience has been the mistress of those who wrote well. And so, as mistress, I will cite her in all cases. Though I may not, like them, be able to quote other authors, I shall rely on that which is much greater and more worthy, on experience, the mistress of their masters. And it's been through my experience of working to develop ambidexterity technically over these last 17 years that I've completely learned it's not something you're necessarily born with, but it's completely developmentable over time, and our bodies are designed for it and benefit from it greatly. So, I love the way that Da Vinci concisely puts this, while at that same time, when I've spent a lot of my time reaching out to academics on this, they want me to show them at length all the quote unquote science on this. And because it's something that, frankly, many people have never heard of before, and the opposite happens in school where we're not only not taught it, we're actually discouraged of it, there's so much quote unquote science that does not exist yet with this, because how many people do you know who actually practice reading like this, who can even be studied by science to showcase the benefits? The closest that you would have are people who read bilingually in both Middle Eastern based languages and European based languages, because in this direction that you can see here, this Da Vinci quote, Hebrew, Arabic, and Farsi is written in this right to left direction. Whereas the European languages like English, Italian, French, Latin, those are all written from left to right. I gave a presentation a few years ago at McGill University in Montreal, Canada, to a whole bunch of neurosurgeons on this whole topic. And I had in my presentation a number of mirrored slides like this. And I asked everyone, hey, who here can read this more easily than not? And there were a group of hands that went up. And I later found out that for them who can easily read this, that English was their second or third language, but Arabic was their first. So even though they never read mirrored English like this, their eyes ocularly were already accustomed to moving in this right to left direction. So because of Arabic, so when they saw mirrored English, they picked it up immediately. Also, kids who know how to read can read this way quicker than the average adult. The average young brain is more physically symmetric before we learn how to read. And theoretically, that symmetry would actually grow if we were taught how to develop both brain hemispheres by reading and writing within both directions. So considering all of this, so much of what I feel like in this camp is in this slide right here. I'm also a tour guide. I'm a bilingual, binational, bicoastal tour guide. I was first a tour guide in Tijuana, Mexico, where I lived for 5 years. I learned fluent Spanish in my 30s while I was also developing mirror movement development. And I insist that it helped me remember so much to be able to learn those things that I desired, including fluent Spanish in my 30s. I have given tours on the East Coast, here on the West Coast. I was a tour guide in Philadelphia for a number of years, where I also worked at the Benjamin Franklin Museum. I'll get into that here in a bit. So I get around a bit. I've given tours through Philadelphia, New York, Washington, D.C., Las Vegas, Los Angeles, San Francisco, Amish country, Vermont, Niagara Falls, Grand Canyon. So I get around a little bit. But when it comes to this idea of teaching people and presenting all the science, it feels like this explorer right here. This is actually a painting of Juan Rodriguez Cabrillo, who was the very first European to ever set eyes on San Diego Bay back in the year 1542. This guy was hired by Spain to find a new trade route to China. And think of any trip that you go on. You want to know certain things before you go. You want to know the directions to go. You want to know addresses of where you're staying. You want to know maybe the restaurants you're going to go to, the hotel you're going to certainly stay at, different sites you're going to see. Juan Rodriguez Cabrillo gets on a ship. He's trying to find China. He ends up just kind of cruising through here. No real road map, but he's off making discoveries. And in many ways, I feel like that when it comes to this topic of mirror movement development. And what made me so excited about giving this presentation has been over these years when presenting mirror movement development, I've had a lot of people tell me, as you can see here, written by, it would be one of these other explorers here saying, wow, I bet mirror movement development would do a lot to help prevent Alzheimer's and dementia. I've heard it from people so many times, layman people, and my only response was often, well, Probably. I'd love to know more on all of this, dive more into it. And so I was very happy to get this chance to present on this topic, to do deeper dives on it. I mention Alzheimer's briefly in my book, but I'm going to cite some more research here that I was able to go about in finding as a result of prepping this presentation. So, very first thing here, what exactly is mirror movement development? So, mirror movement development, the simplest way to understand this, it's one basic thing. It's learning how to do everything in mirrored direction. So imagine if you were video recorded throughout the day doing everything it is that you do in that day. Take that video footage and then mirror flip it. Your goal of MMD is to work to learn how to do what you see yourself doing in that mirror flipped video. So in that mirrored flipped video, you will see yourself throwing with your other arm, kicking with your other foot, reading in mirror direction, writing in mirror direction with your other hand. Board sports become mirrored, keyboards become mirrored, like you can see there in the bottom right-hand corner. I actually have one. I'll show you right here. This is actually the world's first mirrored keyboard. This is what I now use to type on. And the proper way to actually type on it is by putting your mouse in the other hand with the mirrors, with the buttons flipped, while looking at a mirrored screen, which I know sounds so difficult, but it's totally learnable. And on my YouTube channel, which I'll show you a thumbnail here too in a bit, I have a video explaining all of that and how to get into it, where you can get a mirrored keyboard. You'll also see here on the slide a mirrored clock, which I have here. I'm actually looking at it right now here in my living room, where it's completely mirrored. Left-handed can openers, left-handed handshakes, so on, so forth. And mirror movement development, it's a spectrum of a practice. A lot of people who practice this, they get into it completely inadvertently. They get into it out of necessity for rehabilitation. They get into it because of our education system and them being forced into one side that's not their preference. Whereas then on their private time, they end up developing that other side. This slide here that you can see, I'll have this at the very end of this presentation. And of course, we'll have Q&A here at the very end, and you folks can please feel free to ask about any of these famous practitioners that you can see here, 40 different faces and people groups who have practiced variations of mirror movement development in such a way that had a tribute to their greatness. So two of those three people I write the most about. In addition to the third person that's on the book cover is Lord Robert Baden-Powell, the man who started the Boy Scouts, who was a real-life Indiana Jones, ambidextrous artist, royal spy for Queen Victoria, and a British general who was a huge practitioner and promoter of ambidexterity. But you can see right here, Leonardo da Vinci and Benjamin Franklin, two household names to this day, hundreds of years after they have since passed. Both Leonardo da Vinci and Benjamin Franklin mirror read and mirror wrote for decades, and this would have made their brains abnormally symmetric. First one I'll mention here, Mr. Benjamin Franklin. Benjamin Franklin, from the age of 12 until 42, worked as a colonial printing composer, and he was the 10th of 17 kids. Ironically enough, Da Vinci also came from 17 siblings, so pretty cool little fun fact between both of them there. And Ben Franklin only ever had 2 years of elementary school before this. His parents couldn't afford to send all their kids to school, so by the age of 12, after just 2 years of elementary school, Ben is pulled out of school and goes to work with his older half-brother James in his printing shop. His older half-brother James printed the New England Courant, which is arguably still the oldest newspaper today in America. And if you wanted to get good at cutting down on typos and subsequent wasted paper, you would learn how to read in mirror direction, because as you can see in this photo, all those metal letters that go into the printing press, they're cast in that mirror direction. So your 12, spongy brain, still much more symmetric. Ben, he's basically for 30 years looking into this machine during the day and reading from right to left. And then he's going home after work in the evenings and reading books in the traditional direction. So Ben's brain would have been abnormally symmetric and highly efficient because of this. There's an understanding of memory recollection, which is so connected with Alzheimer's. Memories, apparently, they're encoded in one brain hemisphere, but they're decoded in another. So if the two hemispheres can better communicate, you can better recall more details. This thickens the brain's corpus callosum, allows you to learn more things and become the polymaths that both these men were. Also Baden-Powell, a big polymath. You can see that with his expression of merit badges within the Boy Scouts. But I like these quotes actually here. I'll read these real quick here on the printing press. So these are the things that Ben would have been printing in his press. The very top it says, "Fish and visitors stink after 3 days." That was a big major seller for t-shirts in our Ben Franklin Museum in Philadelphia in the gift shop. Another quote he's got right there: "Old boys have their playthings as well as young ones. The difference is only in the price." So there you go. Another one here. The noblest question in the world is what good may I do in it? And then the very bottom here is three may keep a secret if two of them are dead. So Ben Franklin, and the statue right there, that's Ben Franklin. Before he died, he basically told people, hey, if you guys ever want to make a statue of me, I want it to look like this. Because Ben Franklin, he was the very first celebrity from the Americas. He did so much. I can talk about Ben Franklin for 2 days straight. So if you got any questions about Ben after this, ask away. But he basically, yeah, was kind of mocking the British royal kings who depicted themselves in their statues as Greek and Roman goddesses, Caesars, basically. But you can see there he's leaning on his tower of books with his material there in hand. Again, avid reader. Ben Franklin, he also admitted to being better at this job than the average printing composer. And that would have been true if he's actually going home and reading at night because of something called manual transfer learning. Your dominant side gains proficiency when you focus exclusively on the less dominant side. So you can become faster ultimately at reading in both of these directions. And again, here we've got Leonardo da Vinci. You can see there in the upper right-hand corner examples of his notebook pages. Again, he's writing in that mirror direction for decades, basically from being a young kid until when he had died at the age of 67. Another person who actually wrote in mirror direction instinctively was the Beatles' left-handed Paul McCartney. Very creative, Paul McCartney as he is. He would instinctively write in mirror direction, like a lot of young kids instinctively write in mirror direction. They're not taught it. It makes sense in their bodies to do it, which makes sense when you consider how symmetric our bodies are designed for movement and development. But unfortunately, Paul McCartney, he went to school and his teachers were like, "Oh my gosh, dude, you have dyslexia. We better fix that." So unfortunately, he got fixed. But thankfully, Franklin and Da Vinci, they didn't. And we can see here just some examples of things that make them still household names to this day, that I strongly theorize if it wasn't for their years of mirror reading and mirror writing, their brains would have been much more average, and they themselves, I think, would have been much more average. One other person here who was a big practitioner of mirror movement development was Ben Franklin's close friend right here, Mr. Thomas Jefferson. So Thomas Jefferson, even though they were decades apart in age, Ben Franklin was 70 years old when Thomas Jefferson was 33. Thomas Jefferson penned the first edition of the Declaration of Independence. Ben Franklin was one of four members who were part of editing that document. Ben Franklin made the very first edit to Jefferson's document. And Jefferson grew up with Poor Richard's Almanac and Ben being a celebrity. And so Jefferson was like, all right, Ben Franklin, whatever you say, man, I'm going to go ahead and make that change. Thomas Jefferson, in the beginning of the Declaration, he actually began it writing, "We hold these truths to be sacred." Ben Franklin was like, not sacred, dude, they're self-evident. We hold these truths to be self-evident. Thomas Jefferson actually replaced Ben Franklin as the second ambassador to France. And while he was over there, he had an accident where he broke his right hand. And Jefferson was a native right-hander, so out of necessity, he had to learn how to write left-handed. Only in the traditional direction did he ever practice it, but He did that, and then years later would have returned to Philadelphia, caught up with a much older Benjamin Franklin, and they would have reconnected about his time over in France. And Ben would have asked him how it all was. Thomas would have told him, funny enough, while I was over there, I actually broke my right hand. I've been having to learn how to write left-handed. Ben Franklin would have told him, dude, no way, you should practice that the rest of your life, because I wrote an essay all about that called A Petition of the Left Hand. You can see right here, Ben Franklin, he wrote this in 1779, just 3 years after he signed the Declaration of Independence. At this time, he's over in France convincing them to get involved in our American Revolution. And if he never did that, we never would have even won the revolution, and everything would have been completely different in our country as a result. But in this essay, it's a very creatively written essay. You can see here at the very top, highlighted in pink, Ben Franklin addresses this to educators, and he basically tells them in this very creative way how both hands are designed for equal use, and we should be teaching kids how to develop them as such. Ironically, 1779, that was the year that a school that Ben started 30 years before this became recognized as the University of Pennsylvania, the oldest university in America. And hundreds of years have passed since this. That university holds up Ben Franklin so highly as their founder, but we can argue they're still not teaching what their founder wanted them to teach when you look at this essay. But I strongly suggest that this is a big part of what ultimately had inspired Jefferson to continue writing, because Franklin would have told him, dude, you've been writing left-handed. You should practice that the rest of your life. I wrote an essay all about this a few years ago. The National Park Service website talks about how Thomas Jefferson practiced writing left-handed the last 40 years of his life. Both of those men, they're known as the avatars of the Enlightenment because of their genius. They were both very similar. They both started universities. They were both scientists. They were both writers. They were both statesmen, both polymaths. And part of me does get frustrated, because to me at this point, this stuff becomes crystal clear that we should be learning this. But we're never taught this in school. But there's one other Ben Franklin quote here that I got that always gives me a bit of joy and a bit of comfort. And it's this quote right here. Ben said that a learned blockhead is a greater blockhead than an ignorant one. So I meet enough lay people who seem to get this. Academics, not as much. But hopefully that will ultimately change over time. But for now, I have Ben here who can help me out. A group of people who used to write in this direction, both mirrored and traditional, left and right, were the ancient Greeks. You can see right here this example from thousands of years ago. They wrote it in a style called boustrophodon. And boustrophodon, it's Greek, and it means like the ox plows. And so if you picture a field, you picture an ox that has to plow that field, it doesn't really matter what end of that field they start from. They just go from one side, work their way towards the end, and then they just go down one line and then continue back the other way. So zigzagging like this, left to right, right to left. So as you see there in this, it's alternating lines, symmetric, mirrored and traditional, and this ultimately would have made the ancient Greeks, their brains more symmetric, more efficient. Of course, the ancient Greeks considered one of the greatest civilizations in the history of planet Earth. Right here is a graphic that I made as an artist. I just recently had a big art show up at the Carmel Valley Library here in San Diego called Mirror, Mirror, Body and Brain, What Neuroscience is Missing Today. And I had over 90 pieces that were on the walls, primarily completely symmetric, done. I'm a symmetric street artist, so it was a lot of photos and stuff that I did right here. But this right here, I think, just summing up this idea of balancing the brain, practicing mirror reading, both left to right, right to left, in order to balance the brain. But let's get into some more specifics here, exactly the benefits of mirror reading. And I'll read these off from here. You can see this first line, activating both brain hemispheres. In neuroscience, there's what's known as Broca's area, named after Paul Broca, the French scientist who in the 1860s discovered this area that's known as the language center in the brains of more than 90% of humanity. And that part of the brain is in the left brain hemisphere, which is controlled by the right hand. This is very fitting considering that 90+% of the world identifies as right-handed. So when it comes to handwriting and even in that reading direction, you're really only sending blood flow to that one brain hemisphere for language activation and understanding. But mirror reading will activate both brain hemispheres because you're doing it in that mirror direction, sending blood flow to that opposite brain hemisphere. You'll see also right here structural improvement of glial cells inside the corpus callosum. Corpus callosum is that muscle again in the middle of the hemispheres, the communication bridge. Those glial cells responsible for cognition and also for, frankly, cleaning up much of the brain. And that is something that comes up a lot in Alzheimer's research as well. You can also see right here gray matter growth in the right hemisphere. Again, that's that hemisphere opposite of Broca's area. You're increasing gray matter growth. Improvement of working memory and mental rotation skills. So much of our understanding of Alzheimer's has to do with a lack of memory and spatial awareness, and mirror movement development increases all of this stuff. I get even to some further stuff here. This is another graphic that I had featured at my art show, just explaining what MMD does here for the brain in the beautifully symmetric way, so you can actually choose to read it in that mirror direction and physically work on developing that opposite brain hemisphere while simultaneously learning about it. Don't know if you can tell how much I nerd out on all this stuff, but I love being able to show this here. But this idea of creating new neurons, new synapses, thickening that corpus callosum, increasing balance, memory recollection, spatial awareness, and more. Again, the opposite of what happens with Alzheimer's. You see a degradation of all this stuff over time with Alzheimer's. Mirror movement development improves all of this. Another brain that showed signs of ambidexterity was the great Albert Einstein. Albert Einstein, 1955, he dies in Princeton, New Jersey, where he was a professor, and it was ultimately of cardiovascular issues. But within 8 hours of his death, his brain was pulled out of his head and put on ice, completely without consent from the family, but ultimately has been studied since then. And his brain was shown to be also abnormally symmetric, a thicker corpus callosum, a higher level of glial cells. His anterior parietal lobe was 15% larger than that of the average brain. But funny enough, his brain actually weighed less than the average human adult brain. The average adult human brain weighs 3 pounds. Einstein's was only 2.7. And there's so many questions that I have for this because Einstein was never shown to write left-handed. He only wrote right-handed. I would theorize that potentially because of him being Jewish German, he would have grown up reading Hebrew, which would have made his brain more symmetric. But in the research that I did, apparently he didn't even read Hebrew. I automatically assumed because I also learned that Israel at one time they wanted him to be their president. And Einstein was like, I don't really know if that's a great idea. I'm not all that awesome with people. It's kind of what he said, which, you think of that highly intellectual scientific brain, a lot of that can make sense. But thinking of him as having a lighter than average brain, I would only speculate that maybe perhaps much like how Toyota weighs more than a Ferrari. The Ferrari will still function better because of its better engineering. I don't know, but again, this is where I feel like we're Juan Rodriguez Cabrillo, we're going off sailing, we're speculating, and hopefully we'll get more answers as time goes on. And again, more symmetric brains here you can see with kids. Kids, we talk about how, man, kids are so smart, they can learn so many things when they're young. Well, their brains are more average, they're more symmetric because they haven't had all these years of asymmetric development to, frankly, make it lopsided. We can argue the same thing about Da Vinci and Franklin and kids. They all have those more symmetric brains, able to learn more details. Couple other benefits here that I do want to highlight with mirror movement development. One thing here you can see endosteroidogenesis, which is basically the internal creation of bodily steroids. I'll get into a little bit more of that here in a bit. Again, memory and learning, that spatial awareness, reaction time, performance, balance. And all of this is stuff that goes into a better lifestyle over time that could work to prevent those manifestations of Alzheimer's, more of which will make sense here as we continue. And considering our human bodies, they're designed for this symmetric movement, contrary to what many of us will say of that, oh, I can't learn how to throw with my other arm. I can't learn how to read in mirror direction. I can't do that. It's completely learnable over time with practice. And this makes sense when you consider our design for movement. We're designed just like a car. A car is made for equal left and right hand turns, just like the human body. Both the frame and the skeleton of a human and a car, they're completely symmetric. The exterior features are symmetric between eyes, ears, nostrils, headlights, side view mirrors. It's all symmetric. When you open up the hood or you look inside the body, you're going to see asymmetry all over the place when you look at the organs. The organs and the internal components of a car, they're completely asymmetrically all over the place, but they are bilaterally weighted equally symmetrically on both sides, which to me is the biggest indication that we're made for this mirrored movement. Imagine if you walked into a room that was a total disaster, it was a complete mess, just stuff is thrown all over the place haphazardly. But imagine if you later learned that all of that stuff, that junk, weighs the same right down the middle between both sides of the room, so that the left side of the room and the right side of the room, all those contents happen to weigh exactly the same. It would appear beyond coincidental. So just further indication that we're made for the symmetric movement. On top of the fact that you would never buy a car that only ever makes right-handed turns. So it sounds so silly that we accept just that with the human body. We've been doing that for thousands of years, but mirror movement totally changes all that, fixes it. When it comes to this idea of Alzheimer's as something that decreases longevity, mirror movement development increases longevity, and you can see that when it comes to all activities that are associated with longevity, they're all symmetric. They're all mirror movement. So walking, running, hiking, cycling, swimming, yoga, and all the machines that you work out on at the gym, they're all designed to work out both sides of the body equally, ultimately attributing to longevity. And so you can see right here in this graphic just a whole bunch of mirror traditional images of average activities. So you can ultimately learn how to throw with that other arm, learn how to kick with that other foot right in that mirror direction, and it all goes towards contributing to that longevity. What we tend to see, though, within our culture, unfortunately, is this great mistake of just choosing one side for everything. For anybody who happens to be a golfer, best of luck finding left-handed golf clubs. Typically, you can only find right-handed golf clubs. Our computer keyboards, only until recently, as they're now a commercially available mirrored keyboard. Even lefties, I have so many handedness conversations with so many people, and lefties ultimately get really excited when they're around me, like, oh, I'm a lefty. I'm like, oh, cool. And I'll ask them, what hand do you use the computer mouse with? And they'll pause for a second, then they go, oh, the right hand. So it's completely a thing. Most lefties will use the computer mouse with their right hand because you're taught how to do that growing up. Good luck going to a networking event and trying to shake somebody left-handed. You'll see quickly that it's very, very awkward, even though it's completely doable. People will feel really, really weird with it. But as a result, we're not developing both sides of our brain equally. So I hope that you can get a sense of just how subtle all of this is. But because it's everywhere and we do it over time, this ultimately works to completely misalign the body and decrease longevity. And also with injuries that you can see, you sprain that right hand or that right wrist, typically it's only out of necessity after that that you'll even mess with the left hand, which is something that Ben Franklin wrote about in that petition of the left hand. So I'll get a little bit more into this because I have a cool success story with my roommate Rosa, who has been practicing mirror movement development since we've been living together and has some really cool stuff to share. So as hard as all of it can be, that's the idea of this. It's a lot easier to dive into mirror movement development the younger you are. Harder to do it older, but it's completely possible. And because you've spent so many years never practicing it, when you experience those benefits, you'll really start to experience them. Mirror reading is an incredible example where you'll see that, where it's going to feel exhausting reading from right to left. You're going to have a hard time initially remembering details, things like that. But that all changes over time to the point where you'll go back to reading in the traditional direction. You're going to be way faster at it, and that's something that Diego Irigoyen actually reported to me. Who he's the best mirror writer I know of in the world, and his book was the first that I read in mirror direction. Not because he produced it that way, but I really wanted to read his book, and I contacted him online and I said, "Hey, I got your ebook here. I really want to read it, but in mirror direction. Can you mirror flip your Adobe document so that I can read it in mirror direction?" And he replied back, he was like, "I don't know how commercially viable that is." And I was like, "No, no, no, please, please, please." So he did it, and then he got into that mirror reading, and he told me, he's like, "Yeah, you know, I'm way faster at reading in the normal direction now." I actually talk about it as being kind of like, imagine you're at the airport, you're walking through the terminal, and then all of a sudden you get to the moving walkway and you continue walking on that while it's pushing you. You're going to be moving way faster than everyone else. So, before I hop into my next slide here, let me just take a quick little breather and just get a quick little look here at our chat here. So let's see here. Some exercises of reading. How about the exercise of reading an upside down book? Ah, yes, very good. So funny enough, when I spend so much time mirror reading, I actually don't actively practice upside down reading, but every now and then I will. Like if I'm at a restaurant and the menu's on my table upside down or some different situation like that, I can read upside down really quick because my eyes are used to moving now in that right to left direction. So easier application than reading in front of a mirror will give it the same effect. So I still say that the best thing to do is that actual mirror, right? Is the mirror reading, because that's, again, our bodies are bilaterally mirrored, not invertedly. Inversions are definitely a cousin of mirror movement I refer to. Also reversals, which I get more into like on my website and book and stuff. Um, but you want to be able to mirror it. It's again, it's not easier, but that's the challenge. That's the exercise. So I always suggest more learn how to mirror read. But yeah, upside down reading. That's also a really cool workout here. Ooh, I love this. Oh, there's Ariane. Hi, Ariane. I love the chat here. Awesome. Thank you, Ariane. All right, cool. Let me hop onto that. Next slide. So I got into all of this because of skateboarding rehabilitation. From the age of 12 until 22, I skateboarded for 10 years straight, and it ultimately had misaligned my body. I was going to all these chiropractors trying to get fixed. Nothing ultimately worked, but I had the idea to start skateboarding in that switch mirror direction, which is a thing in the world of skateboarding. I tried doing it just out of necessity, and it felt impossible, but it didn't hurt my body, so I just kept doing it. And I got into doing that, and I did it for 4 years exclusively before I went back to my traditional direction after feeling much more realigned. And when I went back to that traditional direction, that's when I found I was immediately able to do new tricks that I couldn't do before, which is that idea of manual transfer learning. And it was just so profound. I wondered, well, what would happen if I started doing everything else in mirror direction, everything else switched? So that moment was a good, 13 years ago. And I was like, all right, cool. I grew up righty. I'm now going to do everything lefty in this mirror motion. So left-handed for the light switches, left-handed for the doorknob, left-handed for eating my Cheerios, and so on and so forth. And I just started gradually getting into more of all of this. I started writing left-handed in the traditional direction back in 2016. I started writing in mirror direction in 2020 once I learned that that's what Da Vinci did. And I thought, well, he's history's greatest genius. This probably can't hurt. And then I found it was, again, in line with that mechanical, advantageous direction. And then I got into the mirror reading and the mirror typing with the mirrored keyboard. I just got into that only within the last 5 months. So that's been a really new breakthrough. And again, this whole thing has completely realigned my body to the point where I go skateboarding all the time. I'm 42 years old. I've been pushing a skateboard for over 30 years. And I see no stopping in sight. Who knows how long I'll be able to skateboard before I feel like I have to stop. Another thing that I do now because of the balance is rail walking. This is at UCSD, the longest handrail I ever did, which was a major battle. You can see this video on my YouTube channel, as well as this is also a video on my YouTube channel here, longevity and skateboarding. So right here in this slide, you can see Rosa right there, my roommate Rosa right there in the very middle. Rosa, she is 74 years old. This was at her 74th birthday here just recently. And she has spent many years hotel cleaning, house cleaning, and only ever doing everything right-handed. But since we've been living together, she knows about everything that I do. And she came up to me about 4 months ago telling me, hey, I've been practicing this mirror movement stuff with my left hand. And she was practicing it for 4 months at this time. And she told me, Jim, the shoulder pain in my right shoulder is totally gone. So she swears by it now. She's always practicing now left-handed, experiencing great benefits. In my book, I mentioned Norman White, who was an amateur golfer who experienced great results from learning how to golf lefty after a need for physical rehabilitation. And he insists that at 65 years old, his best years of golf are still ahead of him. And there's other examples between my book and another book here that I'm about to mention where you can see the success of this. And considering Alzheimer's, one of the biggest ways to prevent this lifestyle wise is through exercise. And I'll get into that here in just a bit. So the book that I happen to cite the most in my book is this one right here in the slide, Whole Brain Power by Michael J. Lavery. Michael Avery, similar to me, he didn't go to school officially for this stuff, but he's been practicing it for decades. He actually believes that he has the notebook with the most mirror writing of anything in the world, other than like Da Vinci's. But he's been practicing mirror writing for years, and he swears by it. So just a couple things here that I'll mention. So the hippocampus, and this is all from his book, mentioning that the hippocampus helps regulate emotion and memory, and that new learning grows in this area. It's also one of the first areas of the brain to show damage from Alzheimer's. Maintaining brain activity in the frontal lobes is critical for impulse control and related to preventing Alzheimer's. Developing ambidexterity here, my third point, can lead to prevention or delay of Alzheimer's. It facilitates endosteroidogenesis. Again, that's that creation of new internal bodily steroids, the natural production of it here. You can see listed throughout one's lifetime. And lastly here, this point, the decline of these naturally produced steroids leads to premature aging of the brain and body. Moreover, studies indicate that estrogen and testosterone play key roles in protecting the cellular structures in the dentate gyrus, where new memories are formed inside the hippocampi and thus help prevent memory loss and progression of Alzheimer's and dementia. So, again, this might be new for a lot of people. Anybody else feel like Juan Rodriguez Cabrillo out trying to find a new trade route to China, exploring new things? So, I guess I'm a millennial. I don't know, I'm 42, but like any millennial here that I can think of, myself included here, if I want to learn anything new, I'm going right to YouTube because I guarantee somebody way more experienced than me has made videos on all this, very thorough. And so there's a whole bunch that I watched to prep for this, and I wanted to share just a few. You can see right here, Dr. Lisa Genova, she's an expert in Alzheimer's. This is a great video that you can see here on YouTube on what you can do to prevent Alzheimer's. She mentions right here lifestyle influences accumulating over time, amyloid plaque. So amyloid plaque ultimately builds up in the brain. Also, these tau tangles, that's what scientists are looking at under the microscope, seeing within the brain of those with Alzheimer's. And those lifestyle influences, which I'll get into more here, MMD is a big thing that ultimately can work to reverse a lot of that stuff here. Second point here, she mentions that deep sleep is a power cleanse for the brain and that a lack of it can predict Alzheimer's. Now, sleep completely different than mirror movement development, but there's a slight connection with it when it comes to the EMDR that I'll be presenting here in just a bit. Poor diet and cardiovascular health increases Alzheimer's. She mentions right here also that neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to create new neurons, new synapses, and cognitive reserve is that basically you have a lot of details, a lot of information. You're a lifelong learner. You'll have more cognitive reserve. That both of these can decrease Alzheimer's symptoms by creating additional synapses and neural pathways when others die off. And she talks about it great in this video where if you only have one connection of association with someone and Alzheimer's comes and breaks and busts that neural connection, you're going to completely not know who that person is. But if you have two, three, four, or more connections of understanding with someone, Alzheimer's, it might break a couple of those neural connections off, but you can still have other ones that are intact. You're still going to have that relational connection with that person. So that higher cognitive reserve. And I don't know if it would have already been discussed in this class in a previous session, but the nun study was a big one that came up with all of this, where over 800 nuns were followed for decades, and ultimately their brains were studied by science. And a lot of those brains physically showed all the signs of Alzheimer's, but many of those nuns in their lifetime, they never actually showed those symptoms. And a big part of it is that idea of that cognitive reserve, that they were lifelong learners. They were always doing new things. So you want to keep learning, keep learning. And mirror movement development is one of the best ways to do it, because reading is one way to learn things. On top of that, mirror reading. So, which mirror reading, you're not learning how to read all over again. You're just learning a new way of how to do it. You're going to feel that brain exercise while you're simultaneously learning details. It's one of the best things that you could do for your brain and body. Another point she mentions here, every time we learn something new, we create those new pathways. On the very bottom here, she mentions here learning a new language. And again, the bilingual and the ambidextrous brains, they appear very similar. So you can work to learn a new language over time, work to do that. And again, I learned it fluently in my 30s to the point where I give bilingual tours here in San Diego. My book is about to come out in Spanish. Can't wait to do the audio book and actually go to Tijuana and do more presentations like this there at their universities. Yeah, our bilingual brain right here. I ended up learning fluent Spanish so good in my 30s that back in Philadelphia, I was offered a job with Homeland Security working as an immigration case manager in their department. And they told me that just so you know, you're going to be the only non-native Spanish speaker in this whole department, that everyone else was from Honduras and Guatemala and El Salvador and Costa Rica. And so it was a real honor to have been offered that by Homeland Security. Another great video here. Now, this one is connected to EMDR. So EMDR, I've had friends who have told me, Jim, you got to look into EMDR because it sounds so much of like what you do with mirror movement development. And when I was looking more into this, I said, wow, this looks like this would also work to help prevent Alzheimer's disease. So EMDR stands for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. And this is a video here by Trisha Walsh. She's a psychologist, therapist, and she works with guests. She works with her clients ultimately using this because she swears by it, because she's experienced such benefits from this. So it's a type of psychotherapeutic treatment that alleviates stress from traumatic memories. And EMDR, it's basically equal bilateral eye movements, going from left to right, right to left, left to right, right to left, left to right, right to left, so on and so forth. And that this is doing something that ultimately over time helps to have that person ultimately reconnect in a new way with those emotions, to be able to better deal with them, process them, and ultimately not be as affected by them. And the woman who had founded this doctor, she actually stumbled across it while she was out walking, which is another form of that mirror movement development. And many creatives throughout history have sworn by it. Bill Gates and Isaac Newton, even Albert Einstein, when he had his idea for E equals MC squared, his famous equation, apparently he was riding his bike. So much that can go on from this equal bilateral movement. And this EMDR, it mimics a rapid eye movement from sleep, which that rapid eye movement, it's that equal bilateral movement within the eyes happening during sleep. And again, sleep is one of the big indicators to help for Alzheimer's here ultimately. So not only is it eye movement, but it's also symmetrical hand tapping using paddles that vibrate and audio stimulation between the ears. So much bilateral stimulation is going on with EMDR here, ultimately resulting in new learning, elimination of emotional distress, and developing cognitive insight, helping balance moods and memory. And Dr. Andrew Uberman, who is one of my favorites, I write briefly about him in my book, mentioning he says that the eyes are the only external part of the brain, that they're not connected to the brain, but they're actually part of the brain. So when you might be thinking, well, it's only eye movement, how can that be a big deal? Apparently, it is a big deal. The eyes, they are the brain, the only external part. So getting that equal bilateral movement is very important. And again, when you work to learn how to mirror read, you're rebalancing that over years of never doing it. So can't say enough about it. Another great video here. This was a longer one, but Dr. Tanzini, he gets more into the real deep, gritty science behind all of it. A lot of words that I've heard of before, but I don't really get deep into. But he sums all of it up here with these preventative measures for Alzheimer's here. But ultimately, just sleep, learning, exercise, and diet. If you can focus on these 4 things, you're going to have your best results at working to prevent Alzheimer's. And this was actually the slide that he had presented here in that video. And one other really last great video here. This is the shortest one, 5 ways to build an Alzheimer's resistant brain, again by Dr. Lisa Genova. And she basically sums up what Dr. Tanzini had said here with SLED. She adds one more though in here as far as reducing chronic stress. So, but again, it's sleep, it's diet, exercise. And again, exercise, if you are practicing mirror movement development, you're working to rehabilitate injuries through that, you're going to have a body that's going to be able to produce and perform longer over years with exercise. So exercise is huge when it comes to mirror movement development, huge at warding off Alzheimer's. Reducing that chronic stress. Again, yoga she mentions. For anyone who does yoga and they feel incredible after doing it, I always like to remind people, well, yeah, you've been practicing mirror movement development for an hour-long class. You're going to feel great. And again, she mentions right there, learning those new things, building cognitive reserve. But perhaps it's our good old friend Ben here who sums it up, I think, best here when he says, when you're finished changing, you're finished. So always keep changing, always keep learning, keep moving, keep doing. Even was it Einstein who said that life is like a bike, you got to keep riding in order to stay up. So, when you're finished changing, you're finished. Don't become victim of that. For folks who want to learn more about all of this, check out my website, ambilife.org. Also, my YouTube channel. I've got so much content that I've produced on all of this. Also, of course, my book, which again, it's on Amazon, Audible, Kindle. You can find that there on my website. A recent link that I just made is to a store. Now, I'm actually not affiliated with these companies or products, but these are products that I use, including the mirrored clock, the mirrored keyboard, lefty can openers, other things, of course, here in my book as well. Reading mirrors that you can actually just put here in a book. Here, I'm reading this one right here. These mirrors are great because they're shatterproof, and all you have to do is hold it at a 45-degree angle like this, and you can mirror read any book. It's phenomenal. So I have those listed right there. The bottom link here you can see on this for free mirror reading samples. I just published that part yesterday. 20 different pages, all completely mirrored of a whole bunch of Chinese proverbs. So if you want to, just pull that up on your phone, click that mirror reading samples link there at the very bottom, and you'll be able to mirror read for quite a long time. Now, I did just explain how to mirror read, but I also do have this video on my YouTube channel. You can watch that, getting further into that. On top of all of this, there's the website mirrorread.com, which was produced by Dr. Sheila Robinson. I presented it in her class at Dawson College up in Montreal, Canada, next to McGill. And she's been a mirror reader for years. She was inspired by Leonardo da Vinci and Lewis Carroll, the author of Alice in Wonderland, who was a mirror writer as well. And she presents so much of the great research on all of this. Right here you can see this is on her website. You can do mirrored Sudoku. So for many people who think, oh yeah, you got to do puzzles and things like that to keep your mind sharp, people always say Sudoku. Up the ante, crank it up, do mirrored Sudoku. learn mirrored Sudoku. That's going to be an extra added challenge for you to keep that brain nice and spry. And if you want to get really deep into the mirror reading research here, she does a whole bunch of that here. You can see, as well as other scientists around the world, and she highlights a lot of the same stuff that I had mentioned here. Another video here on my YouTube channel on that world's first mirrored keyboard, the why and how to use it. Watch that video if you're really interested in that. And for any locals here, the San Diego area, January, I'll be launching Ambidex Fitness. You can actually go to the website right now, Ambidex Fitness. It'll link to my AmbiLife website, the educational website, but it's the world's first brain body fitness group dedicated to mirror movement development. So as you can see here, balance, brain, body performance. Can't wait to do this from where I live here in Ocean Beach. So if you're local, keep an eye on that. And it'll basically be a monthly membership. You can sign up for that and work to learn this in community. So here's my my email contact, jim@ambilife.org. Feel free to send me an email on all of this stuff. I'll be happy to connect with you all here. And the very last slide here, I'll pop it up here in a moment, is going to be again of those famous mirror movement development practitioners. So if anybody has any questions on any of them in particular, feel free to ask away. So thank you all.